Hello, friend, and welcome. This is To Live the Truth, the podcast. My name is Ryan Clawson. In this show, we sit down to discuss and dive a little deeper into the concepts in my book, To Live the Truth, which you can read for free at ryantclawson.com/tolivethetruth. In each episode, we'll be addressing one chapter in a sort of book club format. This week, my lovely wife Allie and I talk about Chapter 2, Why is Truth Important? How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So first of all, I have to clarify that I was mistaken in the last episode because I was talking about how we would be talking about, like the two branches of the tree and basically just the whole thing about how to deal with conflict. If you remember, I mentioned that last episode, saying that we would talk about it this episode, but I was confused. It's in the next chapter that I talk about that. Anyway, I just need to make that clear that we won't be talking about that.
Sounds good.
But anyway, so this time we're talking about chapter 2, which is titled, Why is Truth Important? In the first chapter, we talked about, the nature of truth. And we talked about, I introduced the image of the divided line by Plato, which I feel aligns with my image of the tree of truth, just kind of demonstrating that truth has layers and that the outer layer, the physical realm, is really just the superficial layer and the most temporal and temporary layer. And if you dive deeper into the depths of truth, then you encounter more eternal, universal, independent truths, right? Which is all great, but the question may arise: why does this matter? What's the big deal about it, right? So that's what this chapter is supposed to help us discuss: is why that all matters, right? And so, turning to the summary page, the core elements mentioned in this chapter are: 1, that principles are a special set of laws that apply only to humans and are the only ones which we can disobey. The second bullet point says, our behavior flows out of our perception of truth, which is our character, our beliefs, and values, like the leaves and fruit that grow on a tree. Which brings us to the third bullet point that says, the degree to which we consistently and accurately understand and value principles will determine the effectiveness of our actions. So, since our behavior stems from our beliefs, our character, our values, when our trunk is aligned with the tree of truth, our behavior will be effective. It will be fruitful. And when it's not, then our behavior will naturally be fruitless. But that's the essence of this chapter. That's why understanding the nature of truth matters, because the degree to which we understand it and apply it and align with it is the degree to which we can experience happiness and joy and success in our lives. And you can change your behavior as much as you want. You can try to every day try something new, and you're not likely ever going to land on anything that's lastingly effective because you're just changing the leaves. The tree remains misaligned, right? Anyway, so that's kind of the essence of what this chapter is. I'd like to dive a little deeper into the why. What are some thoughts that have come to you as we're talking about that?
Just from this chapter, it's important to realize that we get to choose what kind of life we live. Like, I don't know, like it says, we get to choose if we have joy-filled lives and fruitful lives by just aligning our principles that we're living by more closely to the truth, the tree of truth. I think that that's really beneficial for people to know.
Mm-hmm.
And I said this in the first podcast, like it's exciting too. It's like, okay, well, what do I not like about myself? What do I not like about my life? And then, you just like trace it back to what paradigms am I living, or what principles am I living by?
We've talked about this before, that really almost any story any good story really kind of hinges on this fact. Particularly a movie that has a happy ending, or a story that has a happy ending. It typically begins with a character that has some misalignment in their character or their beliefs or their paradigms that is causing a certain level of misery, or at least, drudgery or whatever. And then the course of the movie takes them on a journey, usually an uncomfortable one, that reveals to them the flawed, misaligned beliefs that they have, and helps them along to correct that flaw. And then the end state of that character is a much happier, content state than the beginning, right? Finding Nemo, just an obvious example, right? Just like I say, at the beginning, he's antisocial, he's paranoid, his relationship with his son is iffy, and that very problem actually results in the story taking place, which is really interesting, right? That it's his overprotective parenting that causes Nemo to rebel, which results in him being taken away, and then Marlin has to go on this great adventure to find him. And in that adventure, he runs into people and has to interact with, or other fish, I guess, that he normally would not be doing anything with, right? I mean, Dory drives him crazy, and yet she's the one that kind of reveals to him the big flaw in his thinking, which is you can't never let anything happen to him, then nothing would ever happen to him. Not much fun for little Harpo, right? And anyway, basically, I mean, really, that is the story of, well, that's just how many stories play out, and that's the story of life, right? Is we have these misaligned things that are causing us misery, and we get to choose whether we're going to try and identify those things and change them, align a little bit closer with truth, and it will bring a higher level of satisfaction and success and peace and joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So moving on to the questions then. And most of these questions are not really ones that we can discuss. They're kind of more introspective questions for the reader. But question 3, what principles have I identified in my life and consciously strive to live by? That is something that we could talk about. Does anything come to mind?
Well, I think about our family values
Mm-hmm.
that we try and live by as a family.
Do you have a favorite of those?
The family value that I love is people over problems. So just, making sure that people are more important than the problem that's happening or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps in parenting. It's, I don't know, it's not always easy, but, just knowing that child of God or that person is infinitely more important than anything else that could be happening. Any mess they're making, my to-do list. That's just one that I'm constantly trying to remind myself and trying to align my actions with.
Yeah, I like that one too. It's derived from a Thomas S. Monson quote, which I think went, "Never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved," right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like someone reading this or listening to it they may find it difficult to wrap their heads around, like, what is a principle? What are we talking about, right? So there's actually several books that talk about principles. Maybe in the show notes I'll put a list of some of these books, but the one that I feel like we could invoke right now is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. So he says that principles govern human effectiveness. They are natural laws in the human dimension that are just as real, just as unchanging and unarguably there as laws such as gravity are in the physical dimension. Right? And then here's some examples of some principles that Covey lays out. He says, I'm referring, for example, to the principle of fairness, out of which our whole concept of equity and justice is developed. Other examples would include integrity and honesty, human dignity, quality, service, excellence, patience, nurturance, and encouragement. Right? Anyway, those are just kind of a list of examples of principles the other thing I wanted to talk about to better illustrate the why behind, why all this matters, why an understanding of truth matters, was to go over Plato's Allegory of the cave, right? So in the last episode, we talked about the image of the divided line, where he divided it into the physical realm and the intelligible realm, and argued that as you travel from the physical realm to the intelligible realm, you are diving deeper into truth. And then right after he gives that image is when he gives the allegory of the cave, which is something that we talk about a lot and I think about a lot. And it really, I find it a very compelling and powerful image to really explain why it all matters, right? So I'd like to read through some of it. I've gone through it and kind of picked out the chunks that are most relevant. So this is what Plato says. You ready? Mm-hmm. So like I said, he just introduced the image of the divided line. He says, next then, make an image of our nature in its education and want of education, likening it to a condition of the following kind. See human beings as though they were in an underground cave-like dwelling, with its entrance, a long one, open to the light across the whole width of the cave. They are in it from childhood, with their legs and necks in bonds, so that they are fixed, seeing only in front of them, unable because of the bond to turn their heads all the way around. Their light is from a fire burning far above and behind them. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a road above, along which see a wall, built like the partitions puppet handlers set in front of the human beings, and over which they show the puppets. Then also see along this wall human beings carrying all sorts of artifacts, which project above the wall, and statues of men and other animals wrought from stone, wood, and every kind of material. So it's a little confusing, but basically the image is of a cave underground. The people in that cave are chained to the ground and chained in such a way that they can't turn their heads. And from childhood, they're in this state, just staring at a wall, and behind them, there are people casting shadows of different items onto that wall, right? Pretty strange image, but it's interesting because just like we just read, Plato equates this to our education and our want of education, right? He says they're like us. The people in that cave are like us. He says, most certainly, such men would hold that the truth is nothing other than the shadows of artificial things. Now consider what their release and healing from bonds and folly would be like if something of this sort were by nature to happen to them. Take a man who is released and suddenly compelled to stand up, to turn his neck around, to walk and look up toward the light, and who, moreover, in doing all this, is in pain, and because he is dazzled and is unable to make out those things whose shadows he saw before, what do you suppose he'd say if someone were to tell him that before he saw silly nothings, while now, because he is somewhat nearer to what is, and more turned toward beings, he sees more correctly, and in particular, showing him each of the things that pass by, meaning the things the shadows of which are being cast, were to compel the man to answer his question about what they are? Don't you suppose he'd be at a loss and believe that what was seen before is truer than what is now shown? So again, a little confusing language, but he's saying, just try to imagine these people who have been sitting in this cave from childhood, and their only experience is seeing these shadows cast on the wall. Of course, they would come to believe that those shadows are reality, that is the truth right there. But then imagine someone being freed from their chains, looking around, seeing the people moving little objects above the wall and having their shadows cast upon them. He'd be very confused, and he'd be at a loss to really explain what he's seeing human beings and 3D objects for the first time. And if somebody told him, what you're seeing now is more real than what you've been experiencing your whole life, he wouldn't believe them, right? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And if he compelled him to look at the light itself, would his eyes hurt, and would he flee, turning away to those things that he is able to make out and hold them to be really clearer than what is being shown? And if someone dragged him away from there by force, along the rough, steep, upward way, and didn't let him go before he had dragged him out into the light of the sun, wouldn't he be distressed and annoyed at being so dragged? And when he came to the light, wouldn't he have his eyes full of its beam and be unable to see even one of the things now said to be true? Then I suppose he'd have to get accustomed if he were going to see what's up above. At first, he'd most easily make out the shadows, and after that the phantoms of the human beings and the other things in water, and later the things themselves. And from there he could turn to beholding the things in heaven and heaven itself, more easily at night, looking at the light of the stars and the moon, than by day, looking at the sun and sunlight. Then, finally, I suppose he would be able to make out the sun, and after that, he would already be in a position to conclude about it that this is the source of the seasons and the years, and is the steward of all things in the visible place, and is in a certain way the cause of all those things he and his companions had been seeing. So, again, kind of explaining the process, the experience of one of these people being dragged out of the cave for the first time after spending their entire life there, and encountering things outside of the cave in the wild now, seeing trees and people and water, and then eventually seeing the stars and the moon and even the sun, right? And how different that would be, and how enlightening that would be to now realize that sun that he sees in the sky is the cause of everything, right? The seasons, the warmth, the light, all of it begins with that sun, right? What then? When he recalled his first home and the wisdom there, and his fellow prisoners in that time, don't you suppose he would consider himself happy for the change and pity the others? So, thinking back to those who are still in the cave, would he not be glad that he was not one of them anymore, and pity them for their state? And if in that time there were among them any honors, praises, and prizes for the man who is sharpest at making out the things that go by, so the shadows being cast, and most remembers which of them are accustomed to pass before, which after, and which at the same time as others, and who is thereby most able to divine what is going to come, in your opinion, would he be desirous of them and envy those who are honored and hold power among these men? Or rather, would he want very much to undergo anything whatsoever rather than to opine those things and live that way? And I love that imagery of the men back in that cave who still think that those shadows are reality, and how there are now competitions and prizes and honors won for those who can guess what those shadows are the quickest, or who can predict what the next shadow is going to be. The man who has now come to the light, that's the last thing he would ever want to go back to doing, right? So interesting. Mm-hmm. So it's just a really rich image for me. It's so interesting. And he later explains that the experience in the cave is equal to the physical realm, whereas the experience outside of the cave is equal to the intelligible realm, right? The invisible truths hidden behind things. So once you begin to see those eternal truths hidden behind those shadows, it's a whole richer, new kind of life. It's a higher state of understanding, and after that, you wouldn't want to go back to those shadows. You know what I mean? I also love that he explains that the process of being pulled out of that cave, having, he later kind of talks about how there's a certain art to turning people's eyes away from the shadows, because it's painful and it's uncomfortable. Just like we were talking about with Nemo, right? With Marlin, right? Those stories happen, like I said, they happen as a result of the faulty views of the main character, and It causes an uncomfortable experience for that character, which is it's just a natural process of them being dragged away from their routine of staring at those shadows on the wall. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it results in them seeing things new in a new way. This is the paradigm shift, right? The paradigm shift is, to a certain degree, having your gaze turned away from the shadows on the wall. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I've been talking too much.
No, it's good. It just makes me wonder what person I am. Like, am I just one of those, because the people in the cave are happy. Like they are happy because they think they're happy. That's all they know, but they're not, I guess they're not truly, they don't know what they're missing, So, but I wonder, like, where am I, is there a lot more that I'm missing? Is there a lot more joy and fulfillment that I could be having in my life right now?
Right.
Yeah. I just feel like the cave, those shadows, it's just very shallow. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's exactly the point, right? And that's the trouble with paradigm shifts, is that it's not about seeing one and seeing the other and choosing the one that you think works best. It's literally an inability to perceive that there is an outside, right? And this is in chapter 10 as well, where I talk about how really the true tyranny of the mind is not restriction preventing you from doing what you want. It's eliminating even the idea of an alternative choice, right? And that's what this is all about, right? That's the challenge of it. It's not that Marlin knew that the ocean isn't actually dangerous, but I'm going to believe it's dangerous because I think that's the happier choice. It's that he couldn't even see the alternative option. That's the aha moment. That's the moment of wonder when somebody introduces this idea that you hadn't even thought of, right? When Dory says, it's not very much fun for little Harpo if he doesn't ever get to do anything, it blows his mind because he's like, I had never even considered that. I thought I was doing what was best, and I didn't even know there was another way, right? That's what this is all about. Those who are staring at the shadows in the cave are so immersed in that, they don't know that there's anything else behind it. They don't even imagine that there is a shadow being cast. They think that shadow is reality, So interesting, but it makes it challenging. I don't know.
Well, and I think sometimes you have to be forced to see it. Like in that story, he wouldn't have left. It's like people were dragging him out. Like you said, it was painful. And and it reminds me, you're always quoting, the truth will set you free. And that's just what I think of, that when I say that they're happy in the cave, I think that remembering that the truth will set you free, the truth will always bring more joy and more fulfillment, no matter how painful and hard it is to change and to accept the truth. So it's like being willing to be open to truth and willing to put forth effort to uncover it or, find it. Like, it's going to be worth it in the end.
Yes.
No matter how hard or scary it seems.
And this ties into the next chapter for sure. We're kind of diving into that, but they are so closely aligned. They're really, there's a reason why chapter 3 follows chapter 2, is because they are very closely affiliated. And the thing is, almost always the truth will be uncomfortable. If you're feeling comfortable, if you're sitting there saying, "Oh, I've got it all figured out," then you're probably stuck. You're probably, to a certain degree, still chained in your cave. You know what I mean? And the thing is, the allegory is not perfect because it's a process, right? And there's ebbs and flows, and nobody can claim that they have actually seen the sun. He equates the sun with the idea of the good, which basically is, I would equate it with God. I'm not going to put words in Plato's mouth, but when he's talking about how the Son is the cause of all things, well, I mean, that's how I take it. Is we're talking about God. The whole point is that, yes, it is uncomfortable, and you often have to be forced. You can develop the habit of regularly turning and searching for, a deeper penetration into truth, right? And it does require a certain level of comfort with discomfort, right?
Right.
Anyway, but we can talk about that more in the next chapter, because I definitely talk about it more there. But the point is that, I feel like this allegory really communicates the importance of truth. Because because again, like he says, when someone is for the first time torn away from those shadows and sees something new for the first time, they're going to be disoriented, they're going to be confused, they're going to be afraid, and they're going to be tempted to turn back to those shadows because that's what's comfortable. But to do that, which is, by the way, is the same as fixating on the leaves and fruit of the tree. Is like what we were saying earlier. It's throwing something at the wall. It's just trying something different for its own sake. It will never really produce any lasting change in your life. And so I would hesitate to say that the people in the cave are happy. So Emma Bovary is the example of that person, right? Emma Bovary is a cave dweller still, right? Because there is a void in her soul that she can feel it. She feels that longing for something more. But everything that she tries is really just within still that same paradigm. She resists any enticing to turn away from those shadows, right? And that's a tragedy. And really, that's the definition of a tragedy. A story with a tragic ending is a character who has those misalignments in their paradigms, in their character, and they don't change it. They don't learn from the problems that misalignment causes in their life. You see what I'm saying? So that Marlon learns from it, changes. Emma does not learn. She just, she never takes a step back. She never turns and sees anything from a new perspective. And as a result of her lack of changing, it results in a tragic end, right?
It's a good book.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like that one. Anyway, I feel like I'm maybe beating a dead horse, but what do you think?
I think that's awesome.
Okay, well, hopefully that makes it a little clearer for someone who wants to know why all this matters. But in the next chapter, we talk about basically how to embrace truth, how to undergo that journey of escaping the cave and diving deeper into truth, and what tools you need to be prepared to do that, which is pretty exciting. Well,
awesome.
Thanks for joining me today, Ali. It was always fun to chat about these things with you.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thank you for joining us in this discussion on why truth matters. I hope you've enjoyed it. Additional resources can be found on my website at ryantclawson.com. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section and we will address them in a future episode. Also, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast. That makes us easier to find. Finally, I wish you peace and success, and I hope you can join me next week.